Hi, thank you for joining us for this latest edition of our Women in Sport podcast. Mitchell, Blythe, and I have a brilliant guest today, Izabella Malewska.
So Isabella plays the role of Grazyna the Tramp Jarzynowska, a rising MMA fighter in Croydon in the upcoming film Tramp. The story dives deep into the world of MMA, mixed martial arts, identity, survival, and explores themes of motherhood, social media abuse, and external pressures on athletes. We're really thrilled to have you here today to discuss the film with us. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
For listeners who haven't heard of the film Tramp yet, how would you describe the story of the film and the sort of world that it takes place in?
Yes, so the story of Tramp, obviously, as you say, it follows Grazyna, a rising MMA star. So it's basically, I'd say, a nice marrying, if I get the word out, of that MMA world, the fight world, and then the more intimate world of motherhood and family. So where in the film she becomes pregnant, it basically straddles those two areas of life, which on the kind of like outside, you would think, well, where's the crossover and where's the similarities and, what's the intersection? But actually, upon watching it and also for us upon making it, there's actually a huge intersection and a lot of things that, were very similar to do with like having to fight and, having to survive that world and then being a mum on your own, having to like, do that world as well. And I think the kind of two worlds interweave really nicely, physically and emotionally. So, a fighter has to be a certain way to fight, right? They've got to be fit, healthy, like mentally, like in a certain space. And then motherhood is another world that's incredibly tough and brutal. And I think it's that part of the film for me that really speaks a lot. And that I think for a lot of viewers is the really interesting and relatable part as well, because, not everyone's a fighter, but a lot of people are mums and parents. And I think you understand that there's a huge juggle there to be had. And it's what we were talking about earlier about how in sport and in, I guess specifically here in the fight world, like what happens when you become a mum? Like how do you navigate that space? Once your time is limited, your body has gone through something enormous. And I think it's really nice to have a film that speaks about that because a lot of films skirt over, I think, that nitty-gritty and vulnerable side. It's incredibly vulnerable. And I think, I was saying earlier, I became a mum recently, and there is so much vulnerability there. But I think now I've become a mum, I can really understand that the fighting world as well, the MMA world, there's a huge amount of vulnerability. You're exposing yourself to a space and to being judged and kind of, I think that actually I realize now has more weight in it than I assumed when I was filming as well.
And what initially attracted you to the project to start the filming?
So originally, Philip approached me with this as a short film, actually. It wasn't going to be a feature film a while ago now, I think just after lockdown. So he knew my partner, Tristan, who's actually the cinematographer on this. Um, and we were sat in a coffee shop. I think I tagged onto the coffee meet. They were supposed to be just them two, and I came along just for fun. And he started saying, I asked him what projects he's coming up, and he spoke about this short film he wanted to write about a fighter that becomes a mum and that kind of world. And straight away I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like that's kind of like the dream scenario for an actress, that meeting of worlds again, like I said earlier, of this really physical role in both sides, but also this incredibly emotional role. I also really like that he wanted to cast and make a film about a Polish person. Like I think that, identity is not explored often enough, or it's explored, in my opinion, often in quite a limiting way and in very limited roles. So to have that culture at the forefront of the film and, me being, well, what is my native like nationality was really fun as well. So yeah, I guess just the excitement of being able to train up to be a fighter was incredible. I was like, great, yeah, sign me up. So yeah, originally it was gonna be a short film, and then a bit of time passed, and he was like, do you know what? Let's make a feature. Let's do it because why not? And then I got even more excited. I was like, okay, well, that's exactly what I want to do. So yeah, so that's kind of what attracted me. I've never been given the opportunity, basically, is what I'm saying, to do a role that's physical like that. I think I've always been
Mm.
given quite cute little roles, which is nice. But yeah, it's quite fun to do something that's more meaty.
That's an interesting point you make as well about allowing you to explore the sort of Polish side of the main character as well. Because I'd say MMA as a sport is quite well represented by Polish fighters,
Yeah,
and especially women fighters. Because you have Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who was
exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah.
yeah, I did. He had sort of like ruled that division for years. As one of my favorite fighters as well, and she was in the UFC. Did you have to sort of like channel your Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the fight
I did.
scenes?
She was 100% my kind of character profile. I definitely did a lot of stalking online and on social media of her and her story. So yeah, we definitely held her at like kind of the foreground of how I presented Grażyna. But also what was quite useful is my brother in the film, Michał, he is actually also trained MMA fighter. So he is in that world. So that was quite cool as well. And he's also natively Polish, brought him over from Poland, which was really fun. So yeah, he was a great kind of person to have on the side. I kind of actually just felt like he was actually my brother, which was quite useful. To kind of interject and inject what that world kind of is like.
And how did you sort of prepare then physically and emotionally for the role? Because it's obviously a very physical role, but it's also a sort of emotion as well in the film. So how
Yes.
did you sort of go about preparing for both of those aspects?
So physically, I'll be honest with you guys, what happened is I was supposed to have quite a rigorous training program, and then we landed one of the fight nights quite early, and they said, well, if you want to come film in the November one, and I started training, I think in end of August or beginning of September. And me and Philip sort of ummed and ahed, and we were like, well, what do we do? Because this is an amazing opportunity, and they don't do them that often. And it was quite, it's a challenge to get in on a real fight night. And the next one after that would have been, I think, like 6 months later. So we sort of slightly fast-tracked my training program. I got a personal trainer, an MMA fighter, he was amazing. But yeah, it was definitely a lot quicker than what I assumed. So in the actual fight nights and when we were doing the fights, I definitely utilized Ruqsana, Ruth to kind of give me kind of speedy version of how to look the part and do the part. But also I will say I do teach fitness as alongside acting. So I teach like bar and Pilates. I've always been quite into fitness, so I think that was quite helpful. Obviously, bar is a world away from fighting, but in terms of like the core strength and having kind of, I guess, within you uh, to do something physical, it was, I think there in some ways. I was just kind of channeling the mind of a fighter that was, I think, trickier. And actually, in an interesting way, I think the physical side was hugely challenging. But I know you asked about the emotional. I think that even though I'm an actress, actually being in a role that was being a young mum and that whole vulnerable side, it was actually definitely a more challenging emotional role than I've done before. Like I've never done something where I really had to sort of dig deep and be like, okay, what is it I'm feeling here? And yeah, playing that mum role was a challenge. And I definitely utilized, so for example, Marina, the producer, she was actually very heavily pregnant when we were filming. So she was kind of like confident to me on that side of things, talking about, how certain things feel, how you feel pre and post birth, and physically what that's like, which was very useful. I mean, now I could obviously do it and, and understand, but at the time I hadn't given birth, I didn't know. So yeah, it was useful.
It's really interesting to listen to you talking about the interplay between having to focus on the sport, so having to focus on the profession that you're in, and then at the same time, it's as if you've got this double life going on because you're also a parent in the film as well. And the film portrays the environment in which you were as really quite inclusive towards motherhood. Which is amazing. But I wanted to ask you about the fight sequences a little bit. Just
Yeah.
so obviously Ruqsana is such an impressive sportswoman, having won world titles in both Muay Thai and boxing, and she's a huge ambassador for the sport, 20 years experience, and Ruth being a world champion as well in kickboxing. So in relation to your fight sequences, because you had several fight sequences filmed, what was that experience like?
I mean, initially very intimidating, not because they are intimidating people, but obviously being in a scene with those two figures is, I mean, I was overwhelmed. I was like, this is incredible that I'm going to do this. But I thought, crikey, Philip, like, you're mad. I can't believe you're actually making me fight with real fighters because I thought we were going to get, actors who are stunts in, etc. Very, very pleased we didn't do that. I think it's incredible that the film got real fighters, and especially Ruth and Roxana. I think they're amazing women. But yeah, at first incredibly intimidating because I think I personally had a version of what a fighter would be like. And, in my opinion, I was like, oh God, they're going to be scary. They're going to be shut off. They're going to be very close-minded. But I couldn't have been further, like, I couldn't have been more wrong, basically, because actually what they were and are is incredibly emotionally in tune. And women's women, like, they wanted those scenes to look amazing. We all became incredible friends. We still are now. And that sense of camaraderie, I think, is what made the fight scenes amazing. I know we're fighting against each other, but actually we're totally backing each other the whole way through. And also having their expertise was so useful. Like I said to you earlier before we started recording this, the first fight night we filmed, I went in a very actor hat, like, oh God, I've got to be all pumped up, riled up. And I remember Roxana was just sat on one of the benches, very cool. She was like, you need to stop. She was like, actually, don't do anything. She was like, just sit down and just breathe. She was like, we don't do that before a fight. We don't jump around. We get into the zone. We're very calm. We're very collected. Um, and that's the energy you go in on. You don't use your energy beforehand. So that was amazing. Moments like that, which actually were incredible to the character as well. I sort of fed that back in after. I was like, okay, she's not, always loud and aggressive. She's actually a very insular person. So yeah, so having that was amazing. And just general technique stuff, there would be times where I had my trainer, but he wasn't always there on the day and you forget stuff in the moment. So, they'd be like, remember when you throw that punch, you're throwing it from your shoulder, you're throwing it with weight, you're not throwing it lightly, just the way you walk, like this is your energy. And it was really nice to have that specificity, can't say that word, but there we are. Um, and on the day, it's yeah, it's such a privilege. You're like, you wouldn't normally have that. I mean, you kind of be on your own, or you'd have, a coordinator or someone who's doing that, but you don't have real fighters. So physically and emotionally, mentally, they were incredible for that, both of them.
One of the things that we talk about on this podcast, so obviously Mitchell and I are both lawyers, but we've got a quite deep interest in sport. Obviously, Mitchell is an absolute uh, long-standing supporter of MMA, so his depth of knowledge in this is much greater than mine. But one of the reasons why we find it easy to talk about diversity within sport is because it's a lot easier to understand when you're talking about it, as opposed to our day-to-day job. We'll be talking about diversity and inclusion in an office space, for example, or the way a contract is operated. But we've spoken to some really brilliant role models on this who have talked about changes that they've seen brought about in their sport to encourage women and girls proceed in the sport. And you mentioned that you're obviously a fitness trainer when you're not being a mother and an actor as well, and you teach fitness. But what changes have you seen in that environment that you think have made it more inclusive, recognizing at the end of the day that people are just different?
Yeah, I mean, it's been huge. I've worked now in the company I work in for 10 years, and been kind of into fitness and sport ever since I was tiny and dance, etc. But I would say in the last 10 years, yeah, massively. Such an overhaul to do with body image that I think is really important. Different sizes, shaped bodies, what those bodies look like, what those bodies have been through. I think that's a really important factor in fitness, is that fitness is not about getting fit. It's also rehabilitation. It's also mental space, for people to go somewhere where they can feel good about themselves, but feel good mentally. And I just think like once you kind of harness and feel good in your mental well-being, then physically you do better, and I think that when I teach, that's kind of how I like to teach and how I like to work with people and work with my clients. And I think like, yeah, huge diversity on race as well. Like I think that's super important, like in what we see kind of in advertising and sportswear advertising as well. Like I've seen a huge shift from, the kind of like norms of what we used to have. And I think that's also really important, because how are you going to inspire, like, you know, a young Muslim girl, young black girl to get into sport if all she sees is like white people on screens, you know, wearing fitness? And also, apart from like race and culture, like the size and shape of body, like I mentioned before, like I know when I started teaching, it was a huge emphasis on like skinny bodies, and skinny was fit. Like skinny is
Mm.
fit. It's not fit. Like it's one type of body that does fitness. But you know, curvy bodies are fit, you know, like smaller bodies are fit, bigger bodies are fit. Like, so I think that has been the huge change that I've seen. And like, I know that the company I work for have definitely channeled like a huge amount into their like advertising and spaces to make sure that the clients feel represented. And yeah, I think that's just hugely valuable and important. I think we still have way to go. You know, I don't think it's perfect yet. Um, but I think also the way we teach fitness the language we use now, in my opinion, has changed. You know, you're not burning calories, you're not dropping weight, you're getting strong. And I think strength in fitness is what I teach to make my clients aspire to, rather than, you know, just being there for losing weight purposes. And like I mentioned before, the rehabilitation thing, I think that's really important, especially from my opinion for women, because a lot of, you know, pre and postnatal women are, I think, just left in the lurch, really, especially once you've had a baby. It's like, okay, cool, great, baby's healthy, baby's happy. Oh, mum, you'll deal with yourself. And it's like, mums come out of birth with like all sorts of like bodily, like, you know, discomfort and malfunction, and we just are like left to deal with it. And I know I'm very privileged in like the company I work for, because we do specifically look after, you know, postnatal women. But now I've given birth, I think, God, there's still so much more we can do. And I think it's crazy that we just assume that like the body bounces back and it doesn't need any help or, you know, guidance. Because again, like what I said before, that moment as well is very interlinked emotionally with the physical, you know, like how can you expect a new mum to go out in the world and feel strong if her body is like not back to where it was, or at least, you know, a new version that's going to be like strong again? How do you expect her to be emotionally like okay uh
Yeah.
in that? So yeah, so I think in the fitness world, like I think we can definitely still do a bit more in terms of like like definitely postnatal work and like help women in that respect. um but it's definitely getting better, like I think. So yeah, a huge shift, I would say, in the last 10 years. It still can
Huge.
do more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of I think Mitchell mentioned earlier, on a previous podcast, we've spoken with Zainab Alima, who's a fantastic female Muslim rugby player who plays for Richmond. And one of the things that really helped her proceed in her sport was the ability to continue to wear her hijab, and she didn't have to wear, you know, the standard stereotypical kit. She was allowed to cover up, and I think that's something which Ruqsana, your co-star in this film, has helped in creating a sports hijab for non-athletes in combat fighting sports as well. And it's really important. But one of the things I think that is a common theme across our podcasts is role models. And that's why sportswomen, and you having portrayed a sportswoman in this film, Tramp, is that you're role modeling that you can still have. Firstly, you can still have ambition. So you've had a baby, but I'm still ambitious to continue in what I started doing. And then secondly, the film portrays the difference in role models. So Ruqsana, Ruth, yourself, neither of you look alike, but you're all brilliant in the sport. But I think I'm pinching one of Mitchell's favourite questions here, actually. But
That's fine, go ahead.
in relation to yourself, have there been any role models that you've looked up to, whether that's in acting or sport?
Oh my gosh, this is going to be the embarrassing moment where I'm like awful with names and forget everyone under the sun. No, because it's a great question. Because
Well,
yeah, there's a million. There's so many. Um, I'm trying to think.
you did talk about the role model, the Polish MMA champion that
Joanna Jędrzejczyk, yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who I should actually be able to say her name properly, considering my family is Polish. But sorry, Joanna. Yeah, no. Okay, so yeah, so for the film, she was a huge inspiration, huge role model. And also is like a fighter and a mum. And obviously pioneered that world. Um, and also because what I loved about looking at her for the role of Grazyna is she's not polite and she's quite loud on her
Mm.
socials and like, in interviews, etc. But when she fights, obviously she's incredibly, focused and she takes her craft seriously. And I also think there is something in the world of sport. Again, I'm not, from that world, but if I look from the outside in, and it's the same in the acting world, that if a woman is good at her craft, she must also be like a certain style of woman and, should be either polite or like straight talking. But I think it's it's crazy we don't always allow for like a space of personality as well within these spheres. And I think that was something me and Philip also wanted to look at for the role of Grazyna, which again I kind of looked at Joanna to a little bit, is that she also has personality, she also has a vibe. And I think that's also really important. And that can be really inspiring for other girls going into that world that, you're not just that person that you see in the sport, you're also a person. I don't know, I think that can be very helpful. Like I know I've done a lot of work in schools I used to have a company where we worked a lot with basically we did a show about body image and three of us looked very different and the theatre show talked about how body image was kind of like processed and taken apart by mass media and made us all to feel crap about ourselves as women. And we would go into schools and I know the girls and the boys actually, we went both gender schools would really enjoy it when we were a bit funny or we might throw in a cheeky swear word or we would do something that was a bit human. I think that's what I'm trying to get to. So I think sometimes it's very helpful when you see sports figures, and for example, in this situation, this a fighter figure have a bit of personality and be a human. I think it like shows, yeah, the next generation that like there's an accessible space there, basically. So I think
Yeah,
it's really important. Yeah.
it's one of the areas with women's sport that I think needs to be sort of pushed more and is starting to be pushed more, which is a good thing, is
Yeah.
showing the off-field characters as well. We saw it recently with the Rugby World Cup as well. I know Hannah Bottomam was one of them who just became this massive star of the World Cup because she was obviously fantastic on the pitch. But there was these like videos of her afterwards, dancing around with the teammates,
Yeah.
funny interviews after games, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that pushes the sport on to the next level, I feel,
I
to
totally
the
agree.
sort of general fan, not just to the people that are there for the pure sports event.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really important. And I know, for example, like with what Ruqsana does, she has a company called Embrace, which is, helping women, especially Muslim women, into boxing and into sport. And like giving those safe spaces. But I know Roxana's personality is very approachable. On her social media, she's incredibly likable and she's really real. And I think that's why she inspires young girls to go into that world. And I think that's how we will inspire like the future generations to go. And it's exactly what you're saying, Mitchell. I know yesterday my partner was filming, I can't mention who, of the women's football team, England women's football team. But the fact that now in advertising we are opening the space for these women to have personality, I think is really important, especially from the sport world, because I think for a long time was a world where it's like you do your sport, you're very closed off. We don't see, what you are outside, or, of the pitch, etc., or the ring. Um, so yeah, I think that's like a very good thing that for example social media has opened up. I think social media has a lot of flaws, but
Mm.
I think that side of it is very important. And I know that in the film we wanted to show that a little bit with Grazyna, like she definitely has like a little bit of like an energy and a vibe. She's not just like a pushover, she's not just there for the sport, like she has, yeah, a kind of yeah, a vibe.
Yeah, she has a social media presence as well, in the
Yes,
film,
exactly.
which obviously comes with positives and negatives, which is also a theme that's touched on throughout the film. I think Emma could probably speak a bit more about this, but it's something that we discussed with Becky Gray, isn't it? Um, on trolling in sports, and how much that can actually impact athletes and how the different types of sort of trolling and abuse that female athletes receive, which is obviously really disappointing, but it does come up in the film, which I was sort of glad to see that it was touched on.
Mm.
I was just going to comment on the discussion about how important female role models and seeing people just being themselves are, in that the number of women from different sports that are represented in the shortlist for Sports Personality of the Year is really delightful to see.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. It's like that things that moments like that you go like, oh, okay, wicked, we've come a step, we've done a step. I mentioned earlier before we started recording about my dad, who's a huge, football fan, and recently he's more into the women's Chelsea team than the men's Chelsea team. Whatever you guys think about Chelsea, I understand that's a different matter. But he was watching the Women's World Cup as attentively as he watched the men's, and he said he enjoyed it more. And that to me is just amazing. I know for the Euros that was in, I was quite heavily pregnant. Me and my partner were in Devon, and we went to a pub, and it was full, and there were loads of kids watching, and they were loving it. And I thought, brilliant, there we go. Like that's how we, amplify the space for women in sport. We just make it the same as men, and we make it, normalized. And then my dad, like ordinarily watching the Women's Cup, just like it was the men's. I don't know, just I found it really moving and great, and I was like, brilliant, because like I said earlier, I've just had a girl, and I want her to have access to those spaces without feeling like it's, an odd thing or a novelty. It should just be. So yeah.
I think there were such poor stereotypes of what women's football was like, or women's sport generally was not the same as men's, so it didn't deserve to have the same airtime and the same support and the same level of just generally support for it. And with that mindset having changed, it then makes the sport more accessible. And as you say, it's not the same as a men's game, but it is as enjoyable as a male game. So it's great to see that there's all those leaps and bounds that have been made in sport in that regard. Mitchell, do you want to ask the last question?
Yeah, of course. So what do you hope the audiences, and especially women, will take away from the film?
I would hope they take away that you can have your cake and eat it. You can have your career, you can be a mum, you can do one or the other, or you can do neither. But I think as long as you are doing something that fulfills you. So yeah, I guess that actually probably does sum up the whole film quite well for like audiences. But yeah, exactly. If you think fighting is hard, try motherhood. It's like, the fight world is like its own entity, and it's allowed and it's tough from the outset. Inside, it's actually, a very like calculated and kind of, I don't know, like precise world. And then motherhood is like, I think what's interesting is it's something we expect all women to just do, and it's not given airtime like it's something extraordinary. And actually, for me, I mean, it's incredibly extraordinary, and I hope that the film showcases that as well, and that actually these two worlds are like mutually like similar. It's as maybe not as in the same way, but it's tough being a mum and it's tough being a fighter. And I hope that like a lot of people can watch it and like relate to one or both, or at least be like educated on one or the other, in a way that's like interesting, exciting. So yeah, I hope that people take like that away, that, those worlds are. I've lost my thought again. This is a terrible, terrible advertisement for being a new mum, isn't it? Really, like, oh, here we go. There's your thought, and it's gone out of my head. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That.
I think you've said it really well, that they don't need to be mutually exclusive.
Yes,
you need to be present in your fighting career, in your profession, but you also need to be present as a mother, and you can't, or as any parent, you need to be present. And having that understanding about that just means that you can still continue to pursue both really well.
Yeah, exactly. And having those spaces that allow you to continue both, and people around you that allow you and give you that support, I think is, really important. And I think the film showcases that. I mean, obviously it's a film as well, so, there's like artistic license, like some things are made to be difficult because it's more interesting and etc. But yeah, that.
Yeah, exactly. And the film is out soon, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think they are releasing it on Amazon soon, and there's a couple of other platforms I can't remember the name of, that it's definitely going on. I think it's in a film festival today in Nantes, actually screening there. Yeah, so I think Philip and Marina and their two kids have gone, which is amazing. They did offer me interest, and I was like, Manon does not have a passport yet, so she can't go, poor thing. I was like, God, also, a film screening at 7 weeks. I can't give her that kind of like ego. She needs to wait a bit. But yeah, so it's gone there, and then I think hopefully a couple other festivals as well. And then I think there's maybe a general release happening in the new year. So like a distribution.
Oh, well, we hope it does really well.
Thank you guys. Thank you
we
so
really
much.
enjoyed watching it, and we've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time,
you.
and wishing
Thanks,
you
guys.
all the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.